regime's inhuman use of weapons of mass destruction against innocent men, women, and children.
We'll be stronger if we take action together.
For the sake of the Syrian people, the time has come for him to step aside.
Unleashed hellish chaos and terror on a massive scale.
The world will not waver. Assad must go.
I am confident that Assad's days are numbered.
If we don't stand up to it, we'll face it more, and they will think they can intimidate anybody.
So this invasion, if it's happened, is going too big, more than the whole world can afford. Because if you have problem in Syria, and we are this last stronghold of secularism and stability in the region, and coexistence, let's say, it will have a domino effect that affect the world from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and you know the implication of the rest on the rest of the world. I don't think the West is going in that regard, but if they do so, nobody can tell what's next.
Breaking news: Russia and China having vetoed the UN Security Council resolution on Syria.
Ceux qui sont contre.
Those against.
The United States is disgusted that a couple members of this council continue to prevent us from fulfilling our sole purpose here, addressing an ever-deepening crisis in Syria and a growing threat to regional peace and security.
The result predictable, the reaction predictably angry. Russia and China vetoed a resolution which could impose sanctions on Syria. Their position condemned by others on the UN Security Council.
The United Kingdom is appalled by the decision of Russia and China to veto this draft resolution.
Unity lost. History will show us the price that the people in Syria and beyond will have to pay.
As I have said many times before, Assad has lost all legitimacy, and Assad must go.
Because ISIS isn't an old terror group, they are newly formed, newly armed, and newly funded. The story of ISIS actually begins in 2003 when the U.S. invaded Iraq to topple Saddam Hussein. As a war effort, it didn't take much, but the cost was high. The U.S. not only removed Hussein from power, but we also destroyed much of Iraq's infrastructure. We dismantled and then attempted to rebuild the Iraqi army. We also hoped to install a government that was not responsive to the people. We imprisoned thousands of men who we deemed as radicals, giving them access to each other. Where does ISIS come into all of this? Well, ISIS actually formed as a small insurgent group in Iraq in 2006. And while they tried to create problems for the U.S. military, they had no money and no real ability to recruit. It wasn't until 2009 that ISIS shifted its focus from Iraq, where it was largely unsuccessful in developing a foothold, and focused on Syria. By 2011, the Syrian civil war was getting underway, and ISIS had its chance. A northern general for the Free Syrian Army spoke out on Al Jazeera, Qatar, and stated that if international forces did not send weapons, the rebels attempting to overthrow Syrian President Bashar al-Assad would lose their war within a month. Well, within just a matter of weeks of that Syrian general making his plea for international help, the U.S., the Saudis, Jordan, Qatar, Turkey, and Israel began providing weapons, training, and money to the so-called rebel groups like the Free Syrian Army. By September of 2013, American media outlets began reporting that weapons were being given to Syrian rebels. CNN reported that while the weapons were not American-made, they were funded and organized by the CIA.
Does this look, from what you're seeing, from what you're gleaning here, like a build-up towards an intervention, do you think?
I think what it looks like now is we're looking at the initial steps of a repeat of what we saw in Libya. Okay, the U.S. have positioned their aircraft carrier off the coast of Syria, but most of that is posturing. The U.S. cannot go in unilaterally in a military fashion, and because the other coalition of countries, or what I call the Axis power countries, which are the U.S., Britain, France, and Israel, are acting in consort and supplying the rebels in Syria who aren't all from Syria, okay? The Free Syrian Army is just over the Syrian border in Turkey. Recent reports from the Telegraph and other major newspapers have cited this force at 15,000 strong, okay? This is in direct violation of international law. The Western powers cannot back a rebel military force working against the government in Syria, which is a legitimate government.
и в последующем поиске союзников, создание коалиции после того, как все сделано. Но это ведь не способ договориться, правда? Это односторонние действия. И они применяются постоянно в текущей политике Соединенных Штатов. И приводят к кризисам. Я тоже об этом сказал. Вот президент Обама упомянул об одной из угроз, это ИГИЛ. Ну а кто помогал вооружать людей, которые в Сирии боролись с Асадом? Кто создавал благоприятный политический информационный климат? Кто подталкивал к поставкам оружия? А вы чего, разве вы не понимаете, кто там воюет? Там воюют наемники. В основном. Вы знаете, что там платят деньги?
Our military to take targeted strikes against ISIL terrorist convoys should they move toward the city. We intend to stay vigilant and take action if these terrorist forces threaten our personnel or facilities anywhere in Iraq.
Russia is launching its first airstrike in Syria. Moscow has been building its military presence there, a concern for many in the Obama administration.
Достаточно посмотреть на ситуацию на Ближнем Востоке и в Северной Африке, о чем говорил предыдущий выступающий. Конечно, политические, социальные проблемы в этом регионе назревали давно. И люди там, конечно, хотели перемен. Но что получилось на деле? Агрессивное внешнее вмешательство привело к тому, что вместо реформ государственные институты, да и сам уклад жизни были просто бесцеремонно разрушены. Вместо торжества демократии и прогресса – насилие, нищета, социальная катастрофа. А права человека, включая и право на жизнь, ни во что не ставятся. Так и хочется спросить тех, кто создал такую ситуацию. Вы хоть понимаете теперь, чего вы натворили?
They're a horrible terrorist organization, and from the outset, for years, we have been saying that the main threat in the region is terrorism. And when the United States decided to make toppling President Assad as the priority of the policy of the United States, we told them that it was the terrorists we need to worry about. As to ISIL, we're supporting the government in Baghdad, the Iraqi government, even before the United States. While people in Washington were scratching their heads figuring out what to do, we were providing tangible military support to the Iraqi government. So we are out there. But you're absolutely right. If the United States were to want to build a real international coalition of fighting against terrorism, they will have to respect international law, and they will have to take into account the fact that there is a Syrian government. So if they want to go across the border and bomb the Syrian territory, even if it's ISIL, they have to coordinate it with the Syrian government. It has a political significance for a real international coalition, and it has a practical significance, because short of that, we fear that it may degenerate into a chaotic situation. And in fact, there are other terrorist organizations other than ISIL in Syria, like this Jabhat al-Nusra and some others. So they may take over the territory which may be vacated by ISIL after American strike. So it is something which really needs a lot of coordination, which we are concerned is not there in the President of the United States thinking.
Okay.
It has to be achieved through a genuine and sustained reduction in violence, as well as unfettered humanitarian access that is unmistakable to everyone. And the only way to achieve that is if the ones who have the air power in this part of the conflict simply stop using it. Forward to try to immediately ground all aircraft flying in those key areas.
You would get rid of a dictator and you would choose freedom.
We came, we saw, he died. Time for Assad to get out of the way.
It is time for you to go.
The future of Syria can't include Assad.
Political transition.
I believe that these countries want to work for peace and security in the world and protect people's. They have instead resorted to aggressive wars and hostile behavior.
Some of our partners try to insist that the Syrian government take unilateral steps, but we insist that the opposition also takes action to prevent al-Nusra and ISIL from using this situation to their advantage.
Facts with you this morning. On Monday, 20 aid workers were killed in an outrageous, sustained, 2-hour attack directed at a fully authorized humanitarian mission near Aleppo. Those are facts.
Well, first of all, this is one of the reasons why I feel so strongly that we need to end this war to overthrow the Syrian government of Assad now. If this war is allowed to continue on until the next after the presidential election, when we have a new president here, as you said, whether it's Hillary Clinton, Marco Rubio, Chris Christie, or some of the other candidates who are running for president, they're all advocating for a no-fly zone, which would directly start a Russia-U.S. war, which could then easily escalate into a World War III.
Russia hasn't paid any attention to ISIS. They're interested in keeping Assad in power. So when I was Secretary of State, advocated, and I advocate today, a no-fly zone and safe zones. We need some leverage with the Russians because they're not going to come to the negotiating table for a diplomatic resolution unless there is some leverage over them.
What about the option of controlling the airspace so that barrel bombs cannot be dropped?
All the options.
What do you think of that option, sir?
Right now, Senator, for us to control all of the airspace in Syria would require us to go to war against Syria and Russia. That's a pretty fundamental decision that certainly I'm not going to make.
Так в этом и вопрос. Давайте сядем и разделим их, и скажем, где те самые террористы, а где не они, и начнем вместе работать. Какой есть другой выход? Расскажите. Просто оттуда уйти, просто свернуться и перестать заниматься террористами. Это не выход. У нас... Я не хочу вновь повторять, какое количество документов и резолюций Совбеза предписывает бороться с терроризмом, а НУСРА – это террористическая организация. Но это не выход просто потому, что уже все поняли, что там нужно что-то делать, чтобы блокировать эту террористическую угрозу. Вот в чем вопрос. Ну так для этого и нужно было создать этот совместный центр, чтобы совместно работать. Но есть силы, которые многократно блокировали эту совместную работу России и Америки. И в конце концов, несмотря на то, что были приняты договоренности, все-таки то завтра они не поменяют свою позицию. И что действительно будут настаивать о том, что они с Россией не общаются по этому вопросу. Но на сегодняшний момент так выгодно определенным силам, чтобы с Россией этот диалог разорвать. Вот сейчас, на сегодняшний день, основная тема мейнстрима. Российские ВКС убивают гражданское население в Сирии. Или сирийская армия при поддержке ВКС. А 4 года назад кто в Сирии убивал гражданское население, которое страдало? Кто? Там не было ВКС. Но ведь убивали гражданское население, отрезали голову, была та же самая террористическая активность. Посмотрите фильмы наших корреспондентов, которые там были, в отличие от западных корреспондентов. Там была Попова, там был Поддубный. Назовите мне имена американских журналистов, которые работали бы в Алеппо. Да их нет. Ни американских, ни европейских, никто там не работал. Там работали наши ребята. Американская коалиция, раз там не погибало гражданского населения, погибало оно. И прилетели они туда спасать это самое, как они сказали, в том числе гражданское население. Вы понимаете, нельзя быть избирательными. Нужно признать, что страдает гражданское население. И заблокированное, и взятое в заложники, и в том числе окруженное внутри, находящееся внутри этой НУСРы. Так давайте определимся, где гражданское население, где не гражданское, и совместно действовать. И именно это блокируется.
Our challenge, coming to the table, agreeing in Geneva, our challenge was to try as best we can to reach out to the moderate opposition and make clear to them that they needed to in order for this thing to work.
Обсуждение, что делать с Сирией, но все же прекрасно понимают, что именно сопредседатели и их усилия двух стран как сопредседателей имеют решающее значение. И именно оно заблокировано. Потому что подобрались к самому главному, к тому, что столько лет пестовали, к Нусре. Нусра – это новые маджахеты. Вы понимаете это? Вы почитайте в историю, посмотрите, как формировалась Аль-Каида. То же самое было, один в один. такое же финансирование, поддержка, моральное, так сказать, воодушевление. К чему привело заигрывание с маджахетами? Оно привело к созданию Аль-Каиды. А Аль-Каида, вы знаете, что это такое. Поэтому нельзя упрощать до такой степени. Нужно понимать. И нельзя идти в этом мейнстриме. Россия убивает, значит, всех, а все пытаются остановить. Это бред. Это, извините меня за это слово, которое мы здесь употребляем, но это упрощение, которое, вы знаете, глупость намного опаснее даже самой страшной угрозы. И когда идет такое упрощение в средствах массовой информации, это страшнее, мне кажется, даже террористической угрозы.
I've been able to confirm that earlier today, the United States struck what we believe to be an ISIL target. We halted the attack when we were informed by Russia that it was possible that we were striking Syrian regime military personnel and vehicles. We are investigating the incident. If we determine that we did indeed strike Syrian military personnel, that was not our intention. And we, of course, regret the loss of life. This said, even by Russia's standards, tonight's stunt, a stunt replete with moralism and grandstanding, is uniquely cynical and hypocritical. Because of a single airstrike, a strike that, if it struck regime forces, did so in error, a strike that we have swiftly acknowledged and committed to investigating, again, none of which the Assad regime or Russia have done in their airstrikes on innocent civilians. Now, of all times, Russia calls the entire UN Security Council to convene urgently so that it can stand up here and express outrage.
The coalition did hit people on Saturday. We did. A terrible accident.
And so why are we having this meeting tonight? It's a diversion from what is happening on the ground in Syria. When you don't like the facts, try to create attention somewhere else. It's the classic magician's sleight of hand.
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. В ряде авторитетных западных средств массовой информации опубликованы утечки о дискуссиях администрации Белого дома, возможности нанесения ракетных и воздушных ударов по позициям сирийских войск. История показывает, что нередко подобные вбросы оказываются прологом реальных действий. Особое беспокойство вызывает информация, что инициаторами данных провокаций являются представители Центрального разведывательного управления и Пентагона. Коллегам в Вашингтоне тщательно просчитать возможные последствия реализации подобных планов. Сегодня на вооружении сирийской армии имеются достаточно эффективные зенитно-ракетные комплексы, такие как С-200, БУК и другие системы противовоздушной обороны, техническое состояние которых за прошедший год было восстановлено. Кроме того, напомню американским стратегам, что воздушное прикрытие российских военных баз МИМИ, что у боевых расчетов российских комплексов противовоздушной обороны вряд ли будет время на выяснение по прямой линии точной программы полета ракет и принадлежности их носителей. Конец. Самое важное. Сегодня большинство офицеров Российского центра примирения враждующих сторон работает на земле, доставляют гуманитарную помощь и ведут переговоры с главами населенных пунктов и вооруженных отрядов в большинстве сирийских провинций. Благодаря их деятельности 732 населенных пункта и сотни тысяч сирийцев вернулись в мирной жизни. Поэтому любые ракетные или воздушные удары по территории, контролируемых сирийским правительством, создадут явную угрозу российским военнослужащим. В завершении обращаю внимание о горячей голове, что после нанесения 17 сентября самолетами коалиции удара по сирийским войскам в Дарь-эз-Зоре мы приняли все необходимые меры для исключения любых подобных ошибок в отношении российских военнослужащих и военных объектов на территории Сирийской Арабской Республики.
Peer military powers. These are existential for us and our allies. The threat for this type of a fight is a nation state with modern capabilities, aggressive behavior, and engaging in militarized competition. So who would you pick for that one? I think it would be Russia.
what are the consequences for Russia other than Secretary Kerry won't talk to them on this particular issue going forward?
The consequences are that the civil war will continue in Syria, that extremist groups will continue to exploit the vacuums that are there in Syria to expand their operations, which will include, no question, attacks against Russian interests, perhaps even Russian cities. And Russia will continue to send troops home in body bags, and they will continue to lose resources, even perhaps more aircraft. The stability that they claim they seek in Syria will be ever more elusive.
The things that they need to both go after the Assad government, but also to have the Iranians and the Russians pay a little price, right? When we were in Iraq, the Iranians were giving weapons to the Shia militia who were killing American soldiers, right? The Iranians were making us pay a price. We need to make the Iranians pay a price in Syria. We need to make the Russians pay a price. The other thing I would do...
We make them pay the price by killing Russians?
Yes.
And killing Iranians?
Yes. Covertly. So you don't tell the world about it, right? You don't stand up at the Pentagon and say we did this, right? But you make sure they know it in Moscow and Tehran. Here's the other thing I want to do. I want to go after those things that Assad sees as his personal power base, right? I want to scare Assad. So I want to go after his presidential guard. I want to bomb his offices in the middle of the night.
Well, that happened about 2 years ago, as you remember, when his brother-in-law was...
I want to destroy his presidential aircraft on the ground. I want to destroy his presidential helicopters. I want to make him think we're coming after him, right? I'm not advocating assassinating him. I am not advocating that. I'm advocating going after what he thinks is his power base, right? And what he needs to survive. I want him to think about, this is not going to end well for me, right?
صحيح الزيارة اليوم لها كثير من المعاني ربما تكون رمزية، ولكن هذه الرسائل الموجودة في هذه الزيارة ليست موجهة للشعب السوري، فأنا والشعب السوري وأنا ككل السوريين كنا نعيش حالة واحدة من بداية الأزمة. نرى الأمور بنفس الطريقة، نقدرها بنفس الطريقة. المؤامرة كانت واضحة، الدور الخارجي كان واضح، دور العملاء والخونة كان واضح. عندما كان يدخل الإرهابي إلى منطقة كنا نشعر نفس الشعور، عندما يخرج الأهالي يهجرون نشعر نفس الشعور. كذلك الأمر عندما يأتي الجيش ويحرر المنطقة وتحصل مصالحة، تعود الأهالي، تعود الحياة، تبنى البنية التحتية، كنا نشعر نفس الشعور. فلا أعتقد بأنني الآن سأوجه رسالة إلى المواطن السوري. أعتقد بأن الرسالة التي يجب أن توجه هي للذين عملوا ضد سوريا، للذين راهنوا على سقوط سوريا في الأيام الأولى، في الأسابيع الأولى، في الأشهر الأولى، وحتى هذا اليوم، خاصة الدول التي انغمست بشكل مباشر في التآمر على سوريا ودعم الإرهابيين، وطبعا مع الخونة وعملائهم من السوريين الذين قرروا أن يكونوا جزء من المخطط الأجنبي.
I want to be clear to those who try to oppose the United States. I want to be clear to those who wish to do us harm. I want to be clear to those around the world who want to destroy our way of life and that of our allies and friends. The United States military, despite all our challenges, despite our op-tempo, despite everything we've been doing, will stop you and we will beat you harder than you've ever been beaten before. Make no mistake about that. Other countries, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, went to school on us. They closely watched how we fought in 91 and 03. They studied our doctrine, our tactics, our equipment, our organization, our training, and our leadership. And in turn, they revised their own doctrines, and they are rapidly modernizing their militaries today to avoid our strengths in hopes of defeating us at some point in the future. We can now, and we will remain in the future, retain the capability to rapidly deploy and we will destroy any enemy, anywhere, anytime.